So I was in the United States Air Force.
Oh, the Air
from
Force.
1963 through 68.
So about 3 years in?
5.
Oh,
Close
5.
to 5 was like 4 years and 8 months and 13 days, but who's counting?
Indeed. So, if you don't mind me asking, how long have you lived in Carroll County?
In Carroll County, I've been in Carroll County for 26 years.
26 years.
Love it.
You love it here?
Yeah, it's great. I live up in Manchester, Maryland, which is just north of us here. I built my house myself back in 1988.
Really?
I got 4 acres up there, and it's God's country. You know?
Must be some pretty nice country up there.
Yes, it is. It's beautiful.
So were you born in Carroll County?
No, I'm originally from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania,
Really?
David, and that's outside of Philadelphia, about 50 miles north of Philadelphia.
It's nice. What date were you born?
It was February 22nd, 1945. Originally, they were going to call me George because it was George Washington's birthday, and they named me after my uncle, Bill Farrell, and he was a World War II veteran,
Really?
Army veteran. Mm-hmm.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yes, sir.
So what is your current occupation?
I have a home improvement business, and I also have a equipment business. I buy and sell heavy equipment. My background for the last about 30 years has been selling heavy equipment. Been a salesman most of my life.
What kind of heavy equipment?
Bulldozers, loaders, anything, backhoes,
So like farm and construction equipment?
farm and construction equipment. That's correct.
All right.
You know, and that's what I do, and like I say, I've done very, very well.
Sounds like
over the years.
Sounds like a pretty interesting job.
Yes, it is.
It's nice.
It's enjoyable.
If you don't mind me asking, what was the reason for you to join the Air Force?
Why I joined the Air Force? That's a very good question, David. At the time, back in 1963, I did sign up, enlisted. I wasn't drafted. I thought it was important for me at the time to really help our country, to serve in the military, and that's what I did for all the time that I was in. It was an honor and a privilege to be a part of the United States Air Force.
I'm glad to hear that. Did you enjoy your time in the Air Force?
Very much so. I was an Air Force medic, and what I did is I volunteered to be was called a physiological training specialist. It's not, most people don't know what that is, but as a medic, it's a special branch. It was called the physiological training, and what we did is before pilots would be allowed to fly in an aircraft, they would have to go through a pressure chamber, and what that is it's about the size of this room in here. It's about 20 foot wide and 20 foot long, and we would put like 20 students in there with their oxygen mask on, and we would pressurize this big unit, and would take them up to 43,000 feet. Then once they get up at 43,000 feet, we'd do a rapid decompression just like you would. We'd simulate what happens into an aircraft when they lose their cabin pressurization. So we'd go from 43,000 feet down to 25. So once they got to 25,000 feet, we'd say, okay, now we want you to take your mask off. They were all in oxygen at the time, positive pressure breathing apparatus. So what we did at that time, we'd say, we want you to just feel how you feel right now with the signs of hypoxia. And what hypoxia is, David, it's a loss of oxygen. In other words, with hypoxia, you're basically oxygen starvation. So then once they feel these symptoms, they would normally put the mask off on themselves at that time. But once in a while, if they'd pass out, we'd go around and we'd be aware that they needed to have the oxygen to survive. So we'd put the mask back on and come around, and they'd give you the thumbs up that they were doing real well. The purpose of this, in the event of loss of oxygen or cabin pressurization in an aircraft, that they would remember what we taught them in the seminar, as far as the different symptoms that they would have prior to their passing out. And it's very, very instrumental. And the one thing about the Air Force, it's the best training in the world. The Air Force pilots, they're second to none. And what we'd always do is before I think the card that we'd give them, I think it was a 1280 or something like that, they had to have that card, and they'd have to renew the training like every 3 years, because we didn't want to have any accidents happen because of lack of oxygen at flight.
That sounds like that's a very specialized field there.
Yes, it was. Then we got involved with another thing, and this was called the hyperbaric chamber. And the hyperbaric chamber is basically it's instead of going up to height, in pressure-wise up to 43,000 feet, we'd go down with the hyperbaric chamber down to 165 feet. And what it was to treat, for example, Navy divers that would have I forget what they call it, the bends. So this is nitrogen that would be coming out of their body too quick. So we would take Navy divers down to 165 feet. Then we'd bring them up on a diver's table, and they would have to come up at a certain period of time. So I learned to be a hyperbaric technician as well. That was one of the first ones at that time. When I was in the service, like I say, 63 to 68, that's what we did.
Ooh. Did you enjoy your job?
Enjoyed the job very much, and to be honest, I owe my success in my career to the United States Air Force. And why I say that, I wasn't a very good student when I was in high school. I barely made it out of high school. I had I think a D+ average, something like that. And when I got into the military, there was a couple things that I was really, really interested in. I learned several languages when I was in the Air Force. I was over in Germany, in one of my stations that I was at, and I had a German girlfriend that couldn't speak English. So at the time, she would teach me, the German, and I would learn the German from her, because if you have to do that, it's the best way to learn a language. So I was 3 years over there, so I learned the German language. And also through the University of Maryland, I went to Torrejón, Spain, and I was over there for, I believe it was 6 months, learning Spanish. So both of those languages really helped me in my career. I worked for a number of German companies with my equipment business, and it was a long career, about 30 years that I've been working for these different companies. So it was great. And I used my time wisely, because what I did when I was in the Air Force, I got 2 years of college through the University of Maryland, and I was the recipient of the United States Air Force Education Achievement Award. And I'm very proud of that. That's one of the things that really helped me out, and I was very serious, and it turned my life around.
That's nice to hear. Were you ever deployed at all? I know you said you were in the Air Force for 5 years. Were you ever deployed to another country? You said Germany and Spain. Is there anywhere else, or was that just it?
No, not really. It was, as far as foreign countries, I visited about 17 different countries when I was in the Air Force. And I'd go around on flights with the military, the air evac, they used to call them. So medical evacuation. So basically as a medic, I would do that. But as far as any deployment anywhere else, at that time, they basically kept you in one spot at the time. So what I did is a lot of the pilots that would be deployed to, for example, at that time was Vietnam. Mm-hmm. So I would deploy them, through the pressure chamber before they went. These pilots would go to Vietnam. They would want to make sure that their knowledge was up to date and satisfactory before they went to Vietnam. So I was the last point that they would before they went to Vietnam.
That's nice to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to sidetrack a bit away from the military.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, you say you lived in Carroll County for 26 years. Mm-hmm. What is your favorite part about Carroll County?
Ooh, that's a very good question, David. I love Carroll County because I like a rural element like what we have in here, the rolling hills, the beautiful scenery that we have here in Carroll County. I like the fact that we have farms all over. I live on 4 acres, and like I say, it's a gift to me and to my family to just being a part of Carroll County. I don't like living in a city type environment. I am a rural type of person, and it's just enjoyable when I can look and I don't have another house 5 feet away from my house. I have 4 acres, and the closest I think is about a quarter mile away from my house is the closest house.
That's nice. I've seen some of the country around here. It's really nice out there.
It's great. Yeah, it reminds me of, I think it was Daniel Boone, and he was living, I think, in Kentucky at the time, and he didn't like to have people moving in on him, and he saw a chimney smoke was coming up, and he said it was time for me to move when he saw the smoke. So that's the way I feel it. I love Carroll County. It's a great place to be, and the opportunity that you have up here is just unbelievable. I work with a lot of nonprofit organizations. For example, here at the community center, I'm one of the producers, and I really enjoy that because it's a great opportunity because not only for myself, but also to give back to my community. So I'm also very heavily involved, and have been for 16 years with, is called Toastmasters International. So I mentor a lot of the younger, Toastmasters that we have in the organization. And to see them achieve success, like one of my Toastmasters that's down at the University of Virginia Law School is Sean Welsh. And we're very, very proud of Sean, because what Sean did here in Carroll County helped to develop the Carroll County Debate Society, which we have never had at all in all the years that Carroll County has been up there. And it was in, I think, every high school here in Carroll County at the time. So unfortunately, it's no longer in existence, but we did it for about 5 years, and gave a lot of our students the opportunity to express themselves in a debate forum. And I enjoy that, just being one of their coaches.
Well, I'm afraid I don't live in Carroll County myself, but I'd like to thank you for everything you've done for this county. It sounds like you've done a whole lot for this.
Well, I'm very blessed, and like I say, it's important to me, because if you don't speak out for what you believe in, you'll fall for anything. And like I say, I volunteer for a lot of different organizations. Habitat for Humanity, the Center for the Study of Aging over at McDaniel College, I'm involved with them. Community Media Center here. And I'm trying to think, I probably have another half a dozen things that I'm involved in, but it's really good to be a part of this, and especially here with the Community Media Center, it's great. And I'm very thankful to the veterans that have given so much of themselves to help the fellow Americans here, that we live in the freedom because of the veterans that sacrificed for us for so many years. And that's something that we never should take for granted. We should basically go out there and say, thank you, veterans. And they do. Up here in Carroll County, they're very grateful to the veterans.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yes, sir.
So where did you go to school in Carroll County? Or did you go to school in Carroll County?
No, like I say, I'm originally from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
That's right.
And my school up there, I'm Catholic, and I went to St. Ursula's grade school. Then I went to a public school when I was in high school. I went to Fountain Hill High School, graduated from there in 1963, right before I went in the military.
So you went into the military right after high school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was great, because like I say, at that time, things were a lot different than you look at today. We didn't have a lot of the problems that we have with, like, for example, here in Carroll County, the drug problem. But, that's another issue, because it's a very, very serious issue that we have in our society today. So I think the most important thing that we could do is to educate, especially the young people, about the dangers of drugs and alcohol.
So yeah, you mentioned you do a lot for the community, like you're volunteering in a number of any shelters. Do you have any hobbies, anything you enjoy doing aside from your volunteering?
Yeah, I've been a member of the Four Seasons sports facility up in Hampstead, Maryland. I've been there for about 22 years, and I'm active in a member of the Carroll County Road Runners. I'm one of the runners, although I'm trying to lose weight right now, because that's one of the important things in my life. And let's see what else. That's what and like I say, with the Toastmasters, I'm very heavily involved with Toastmasters and developing the talent that we have in Toastmasters. And it's anyone that's from 18 years up, we help them to develop their public speaking skills.
That's good to hear. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to maybe ask a bit how you were growing up, because you said you were born in 1945, so
Yes.
you're right at the end of World War II.
Yeah.
And you're going straight into the Vietnam War, the Korean War, all that. What was it like growing up in that time period?
It was great. Like I say, where I grew up in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, it was a different time. For example, we were a steel community. Bethlehem Steel Corporation was still in existence at that time. And it was the largest employer of people. And what had happened, from when I grew up until 1970, the steel industry was going very, very strong. It was an essential part of the United States, because in World War II and the Korean War, we built all these different ships and planes and everything with American steel. However, I was a graduate student at Penn State University, and what I studied at that time was the air pollution control technology. That was what I studied at, because it goes back to 1971, when they had the Clean Air Act. And what had happened at that time is that many of the industries that were steel industries and steel related They were basically shut down by the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. And unfortunately, they didn't really work with a lot of the companies, and a lot of those companies went out of business. Like today, if you look at steel production in the United States, it's probably down 5% of what it was. For example, you go over here in Baltimore, they had the Bethlehem Steel Corporation over there. At one time, Bethlehem Steel and Sparrows Point had like 70,000 people. It's hard to imagine that, of 70,000 people in one area of Baltimore that produced all this steel. And today, what is going on over there is that they're basically dismantling these steel plants, and there's nothing left as far as steel production in the United States. And the bad thing about that is if you're not making steel, like my father was a steel worker for 46 years. And my dad told me before he passed away, he says, Bill, once we lose steel, he said, things are going to start going downhill. And you look at what is made in the United States today, and there's very little as far as, especially with every production. My background, like I say, is in the construction industry. When I go across the 695 in the Beltway in Baltimore, I see all these different excavators and everything coming in, and they're all coming in from either Europe, Japan, China, anywhere but the United States, because we no longer do that anymore. And I think it's critical that the United States really get back to production so that we can improve our economy and not rely on foreign countries for these different problems that are out there. For example, like once they shut down the steel industry here in the United States, it all went to China. Now, they really don't have the technology that we had in the United States, and a lot of pollution that comes to the West Coast, like in California, that comes from China. And that's a very, very serious issue, especially with the climate warming throughout the world. So we have to really focus on that as well.
All right. I actually never knew that. That's really interesting to hear.
Pretty much the truth, if you look at a lot of cities like Beijing, in these different cities over in China, it's smog all over the place. It's terrible. And, today we don't have the smog. You say what the difference is? For example, when I grew up, and I go out in the morning and Saturday morning, and we'd have dust coming down, from the steel mills, and we said, man, that's great. Because the steel, we knew that when we saw that dust, and it's fly ash on top of our cars, we said, that's great, because we know that the steel is in business, and we never complained about it or anything. But today, I work for one company, Gaithersburg Recycling, and they're out of business right now. But when they were in business, even over in West Virginia, they were complaining. It was tub grinder, it was recycling wood products. And even in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, they were complaining about this different byproducts of dust that would come from our tub grinders. And it caused a problem for our company, and we had to move out of West Virginia.
I'm sorry to hear that. So, if you don't mind me asking.
Oh, right, no problem. You can ask me anything you want, David.
What was your favorite part about being in the military? You think you mentioned this earlier? Yeah,
I think one of the things that is really important in the military, it's your buddies that are in the military with you. There's camaraderie that develops. And the thing is, if we all work together as a team, for example, I was a member of the 18th PTF, that was our squadron with the pressure chamber. So we had about 20 guys that would be working with us. We had no women at that time. It was an all-male force. And we worked very, very hard, and we believed in what we were doing, because it wasn't only just the pressure chamber that they went through. We had a week training with them, and it would be survival, it would have bailout. In other words, to teach these pilots of the event of an emergency, what they could survive through that. And it was just a satisfaction that we got of training our pilots so they had the best opportunity for success if they ever had a disaster or an emergency in their aircraft.
Right. Did you find it difficult to adjust after leaving the military at all?
No, I adjusted pretty easy to outside life. At the time, though, I might say when I was over in Europe, we were in the middle of the Vietnam War, and we didn't get a very good reception. For example, people would look at you and they'd say things in German and different languages at you, and I spoke German. I knew what they were talking, saying to us, and it wasn't very flattering. because it was a political war. In other words, what had happened with all the politics that were going on at that time. And I didn't really want to take sides, but you're in the military, you have a job to do, you got to do it. And unfortunately, too many times, the politics get involved with this, and it goes downhill from there. But I was very proud of being in the military and being a part of, the United States and supporting the United States in that unfortunate thing. And the sad thing is, I had some very, very close friends that were in the Vietnamese War that didn't make it, that died as a result of that.
I'm sorry to hear
and
that.
That hurts because, these are close personal friends of mine that up in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
Thank them for their service.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, you said you had an uncle who fought in World War II.
Yes.
Did you have any other family that served in the military?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I have three brothers. My oldest brother, he was in the Marines. My second oldest brother, Bob, he was in the Army. My third oldest brother, Gerald, he was in the Army as well. So all four of us were all military. And it used to be in the United States that was just part of, dealing with survival at that time or life in the United States, that, you have the whole family that was in it. And we were all very, very proud to be a part of the United States. It's a great country. It's even today, you hear all the negativism, but you look at the people here in the United States, it's the best country in the world. And that's what I'm proud of, just to be a part of this great country. On my car, I have a flag that I fly, United States. And that's because I believe so much in the ability of what we have here in the United States, for all the beautiful people that we have and the opportunity. Because you could do anything in life here in the United States. If you put your mind to it and you work hard, you'll be successful.
Let's see. That's nice to hear.
Thank you.
There's an interesting question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
If you could go back into the military today, would you?
I wouldn't hesitate to go back. I don't think at my age that they would take me, but if I'd go back in time, like in Time Machine or something, yeah, it was a wonderful opportunity. It's like I say, it taught me discipline. And one of the things that I didn't tell you about is that, for example, when I was in the military, I was very, very heavy in weightlifting. I was a power lifter, and I worked hard not only to develop my mind, but also my body. And I've gone to the gym for over 50 years, and I got to lose some weight right now, but I'm very, very happy to work out and to train my mind, because life is an ongoing process, and I try to be a positive person in my life and the people that I affect. And I remember, this is back in the late 80s, that I met Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, and he had a tremendous impact. He was the father of positive thinking. And what I believe is that regardless of what problems that you might have in your life, as long as you remain positive, that things will go a lot smoother for you. And I know in my life that I think I've tried, to be positive as much as I can in life.
Were your parents supportive of you going into the military?
Yes.
Oh, they were?
Yeah, my father, he was a steel worker, like I say, for 47 years. And one of the things that Dad did during World War II is that he made I'm trying to think what they call it, a forger. So all the large battleship guns they had in these battleships at those times, these huge guns, my father made them. That was his part of, and I'm very proud of him to do that. And my mother, she was a homemaker, and she stayed at home, but fully supportive of all of my brothers that were in the military. And it was great, because it's a great opportunity. They were great parents, and I'm very, very blessed to have them as my parents. They're good people.
That's good to hear. I know a lot of parents aren't always supportive of their children going into the military. Mm-hmm. Now, tell me a little bit about your family, like your personal family.
Okay. Yeah, I have 3 children. Okay, Tony, he's 37. Then I have James, he's 33. Then I have my daughter, she's still at home with us, and she's 27. And they're wonderful children, and so I'm very, very blessed to try to be the best dad that I can be. And I have one grandson. He's up in Boston, Massachusetts. So my wife's going up there to visit him, I think next week, as a matter of fact. So we're looking forward to that.
That sounds nice.
Yeah.
How long have you been married?
38 years.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been a good run, and I love my wife very much, and I'm very, very blessed.
Were any of your children ever in the military?
No.
They weren't?
No, because it's a different time, and there's wasn't really that no draft or anything like that, and they decided not to go in the military. And I don't hold that against them. That's an opportunity that they just didn't want to pursue. But I think today it's a great opportunity because we need volunteers out there to go in the military.
I think one more interesting question. As a child, did you ever see yourself going into the military at all?
Yeah, I saw that because I'll tell you, I remember when I was young, we used to have a lot of these cowboy movies that were on at that time, Gene Autry, Roy Rogers and all them, and there was a lot of guns and shooting, at that time. And I used to play with these little lead soldiers. You don't see them anymore because of the lead stuff that gets into your brain or whatever. But we would always play with them, and the culture at that time was, you'd see a lot of war movies and everything like that. And I figured that sooner or later I'd be in the military, because if you look at our society, not only our society, but the society in general, what it's been is for thousands of years, there's conflicts throughout the world, wars that are going to keep on going on. And it's a nice idea to have peace throughout the world, but in reality, I don't think you're going to see it. But hopefully someday you will.
All right. At any point in your service to the country, did you ever feel that we were fighting for the wrong reasons?
Well, personally, I think so. That was like I wasn't, like I say, I got out of the military in 1968. And I was going to go back in as a pilot. I was enlisted when I was in the military, and I passed both the Air Force and the Navy flight test. But then I decided, that was in 1971, after I graduated from Penn State, that I decided I didn't want to do it. One of the reasons was, and this is my own personal thing, is that we've lost over like 50, I think it was 50,000 or 55,000 deaths in Vietnam. And we just pulled out of there. And as a matter of fact, latter part of 71, I was up in Canada, and I was a protester against the war in Vietnam at that time, and got involved in it. And I think it was a mistake that we got involved in that protracted war, and we really didn't get a whole lot out of it, because once we left, all those people over there, they came under communist rule, and they were massacred, by the hundreds of thousands. Same thing if you look at history over in that area with the Pol Pot regime that was over in Cambodia, and they basically did away with, massacred over 1 million plus people. And, you hope when you go into a war that there's going to be a total outcome. And I don't think that we really had our ideas of what we wanted to do if we did win the war. And the same thing if you look at today, like over in the Middle East, we get these 10-year wars or whatever, and it's just my own personal feeling on it. As we could be doing different things with our money instead of keeping getting all these wars. But unfortunately, a lot of times this is just what war is. It's if the United States doesn't do it, who's going to do it?
Yeah, I can see that. Oh, we're getting close to the end of our interview time. Is there anything you'd like to say before we head off?
No, I'd just say I'm very grateful and thankful to the Community Media Center to have this opportunity to discuss, issues that the veterans have, the good work that's being done throughout Carroll County, that we are supporting our veterans, and also for the commitment of our veterans that allowed us to have a better society here. And this freedom that we enjoy here in Carroll County as a result of the sacrifices of many of our veterans that gave their lives for the support of this country. And I'm very, very grateful to them, and also to all of our representatives here that are, we might have our problems, but I think that we're going to resolve a lot of them, because the freedom that we enjoy is so important to all of us, and let's keep it free. Thank you.
Mr. Murphy, thank you so much for coming in to be interviewed.
Thank you very much, David.